So today it is my great pleasure to welcome Linda Sikora, Leslie Ferrin, Mara Superior, and Lauren Mabry as my guests. And we're going to center this discussion around an exhibition that's currently up at Ferrin Contemporary that you don't have access to. So Leslie Ferrin, the gallerist, has graciously allowed us a window into the gallery. She's taken great pains to document the exhibition at the gallery, and I'm going to be really excited to show that footage to you. Before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the history of the Everson Museum of Art as it relates to women in position of power and as artists. And I am tooting Everson's horn for our history, but I acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done, and particularly there's been a 20-year period where not just female artists and artists of color have been ignored by the Everson, but I would say the field of ceramics in general. But now my position is an endowed position at the Everson, and ceramics, thanks to the donors who made my position possible, Paul Phillips and Sharon Sullivan, the Everson has a permanent place at the table, and we have incredible new projects like our cafe project, which will be stocked with functional pots from Louise Rosenfield's incredible collection. And that will open at some point next year. It's been a little bit delayed by the pandemic. Last week, I talked about some pieces by female artists that are in our collection. This is an incredible one, Minnie Nagura, circa 1947. Minnie Nagura was a Japanese-American artist who was put into an internment camp. And she, by happenstance, met Daniel Rhodes from Alfred University. And he kind of took her under her wing. She went to Alfred University. The war ended in 1945, but by 1947, Minnie Nagura was included in the Everson Ceramic National, and we were able to acquire this piece as a purchase prize for our permanent collection from the 1947 Ceramic National. But I want to go way back and talk about the founding of the Everson. Our third director, who started in the early 19-teens, was a woman named Anna Wetherill Olmstead. And Anna Olmstead is the foundation on which the entire Everson is built on. She was an incredibly strong personality. She was a force of nature. She wanted what was best for the city of Syracuse, and she realized the talent that was around her in Syracuse. So if you didn't know, Gustav Stickley was from Syracuse and made his factory here in Syracuse and ran his empire from here in Syracuse, but he went bankrupt in 1916 or 1917. The next person that I'll talk about, who's a foundational figure for the Everson and a notable female artist, did not go bankrupt and kept running her empire up until her death. And that's something that Anna Olmstead, as the director of the Everson, recognized. So of course I'm talking about Adelaide Alsop Robineau, the creator of the Scarab Vase. In 1916, Anna Olmstead wanted to recognize Adelaide Robineau's contribution to the field of ceramics and the field of art in general. And she acquired a grouping of something like 30 pieces by Robineau back in 1916. And then upon Robineau's death in 1929, Anna Olmstead was still the director, as she would be for several more decades. And she acquired more than 100 pieces from Robineau that are still in the Everson's current collection. So I want to put everybody in mind of the incredible things that Adelaide Robineau accomplished in her career. She was a China painter. She only started making her own vessels in about 1900 or 1901 out of porcelain. And I saw Adrian Spinozzi from the Metropolitan Museum on this call. Adrian is currently the protector of the very first piece that Adelaide Robineau made, which was in the piece collection of Martin Eidelberg, which is being donated to the Met. So I'm excited to be able to visit that first Adelaide Robineau vessel in person. But as her career went on, Adelaide Robineau perfected her own porcelain formula that she had to really sort of mix up herself. Pre-made porcelain was not something that was available to artists in the early 1900s. So she perfected a formula that she got from a French artist. Not only that, she started working on crystalline glazes. This is a crystalline glaze piece that's in the Everson's collection. You can see how closely that she dialed those things in. Crystalline glazes are tough even with a computer-controlled kiln, and Adelaide Robineau was working with a much lower level of technology, of course. One of the most notable things about Adelaide Robineau was that she was recognized by the Women's League and the People's University in University City in St. Louis, and she was given a teaching position. And that teaching position was what I wanted to talk about because she was picked along with two other male artists, Frederick Burton Reed and Texiel Doat, who was a well-known French artist, and they formed the core faculty at University City. So the three of them came in, and this is 1910, I believe, or 1911, and they were given incredible studios to work in. They were given the best films that were possible at the time to work with. But Adelaide Robineau came in with the expectation that she would have all of the resources that the better established male artists would have, chiefly access to assistance and the full range of all of the resources. And that wasn't the way that things worked out. So Adelaide Robineau was kind of marginalized within the studios. She was pushed off the edges. She didn't have the wealth of assistance and sort of glaze knowledge that the other two male artists had. So she had kind of a chip on her shoulder. And it's important to recognize that it was in this environment that Adelaide Robineau made the scarab vase. So if you're not familiar with the scarab vase, which some of you may not be, legendarily, it took Adelaide Robineau more than 1,000 hours to do the carving alone on the scarab vase. So she threw it on the potter's wheel herself using the technology at the time out of a porcelain formula that she formulated herself. And then if you didn't notice, all of the carving on the scarab vase was done when the scarab vase was bone dry. So she could do an area maybe the size of a nickel every day. She was using tiny crochet needles, she was using surgical instruments, and she was abrading away at those surfaces to be able to do this decoration. I'm going to show you an image that people rarely get to see, and that's an image A of the inside of the scarab vase without the lid on it. You can see how translucent the porcelain is. And the class actually that spawned this online sharing session, we actually got to take an endoscope to the scarab vase, so a camera on the end of a cable, and we got to explore the inside where we learned that it was thrown in two pieces. And there were quite a few places where it appears that Robineau had nicked through the porcelain and had carefully repaired it from the inside with a little daub of liquid porcelain. But you can see how delicate and how incredible all of the porcelain is here. The other thing that's incredible about the scarab vase that is illuminating about Adelaide Robineau's struggles and her personality is that when she put the scarab vase in the kiln for the glaze firing, it came out of the kiln with major cracks that went up the side. So she didn't freak out, she didn't break it, she went in with calcined kaolin that she had fired in the kiln, so dusted porcelain that she had fired in a kiln, and she very carefully repaired the piece, and over the course of several more firings, you can't see the cracks on the outside, but you can see these faint firing cracks from the bottom. And when we examined the inside of the scarab base, we confirmed that no firing cracks go through to the inside of the scarab base. So after Adelaide Robineau died in 1929, Anna Olmstead acquired that grouping of Robineau's pots, and she also founded the Ceramic National Exhibitions in 1932, which grew to be sort of the largest, best recognized national ceramic competition in the country, and those went from 1932 to 1972. And you can actually look at the rise of the Ceramic Nationals, and you can actually kind of see the male Montana contingent of potters grow after Peter Volkos in sort of power within the ceramic nationals. And I would say women become a little bit more marginalized, but women were still getting major purchase prizes and participating in the ceramic nationals. There is incredible research to be done there. So if anybody's interested in doing a research project, particularly on the role of women as they relate to the ceramic nationals and to the Everson's collection in general, come see me and I will make all of the resources possible to you to do that. So I'm going to introduce our first guest, who is the gallerist Leslie Ferrin. Leslie has a background like I do as a fine artist herself, and she went into galleries starting in the late 1970s and early 1980s. I can let her talk a little bit more about her background, but I want to leave a lot of space to actually show you the exhibition and show you images and video pieces from this exhibition. But welcome, Leslie.
Thank you, Garth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. So can you give us just the thumbnail bio on how you transitioned from being an artist to being in the gallery world? And in particular, there's, I don't know, one major event that really made you want to place yourself at the, and your expertise sort of at the center of exhibitions. You know more about upcoming exhibitions and what's going on in the gallery world than almost anyone that I know. Can you give us your thumbnail bio and tell us about the Nature Nurture exhibition?
Well, interestingly, this morning I was starting to write my a comment for Studio Potter about Paul Smith, and the shows that were organized by the American Craft Museum, what we kind of just called the Craft Museum, were the Young American Show, and I aspired, and I don't know if this is a story you were referring to, but I truly grew up looking at those exhibitions on 53rd Street, and the one that I thought was going to make it or break it for me was the Young Americans, which was an extension of Objects USA. So at 17 years old, having made ceramics in high school, I applied and was rejected. And I applied again at age 29 and was rejected. So I may be the only person who applied twice and was rejected twice. But that was a really important show that established the, people's careers at the time. And when I realized I wasn't going in the direction that I aspired to, I switched from, we were running a co-op gallery. Mara Superior was one of my partners, Barbara Welch was the other founding partner. And we had a studio and gallery, and I decided that my skills were better spent doing for others what wasn't being done for me. And after a couple of years, I wrapped up everything in my studio, and to this day, never went back to working in wet clay. But I always felt like I was the person that was I'd learned what I wanted as a nurturer. I learned to, give that to others. It was just, I was business oriented. I was a numbers person. I counted how many women were in every show from the time I was, old enough to figure that out. And I felt like I had a different mission in life. And I really totally appreciated the time I was making things, because I kept hitting those walls that artists hit all the time, work block, struggle with family, struggle with, just everything that you struggle with if you are trying to be creative and move forward with individual ideas.
So can you introduce us to kind of the range of the work that's in the Nature Nurture exhibition? Then I thought maybe we could say hi to the panelists, and then we can share some of the video footage that you had made from the exhibition.
So we are here in the exhibition. I haven't been at work very much because we're closed, and we will reopen when the museum, Mass MoCA, where we're based at, opens to the public. But between now and then, the exhibition is kind of like an aspect. It's in pause. It's a, the exhibition that keeps on giving. So it was organized with the idea that there was going to be a symposium here in our building with three other entities that are in Building 13. And the idea was to celebrate women during the month of March, Women's History Month, you know, a whole slew of anniversaries to bring attention to the work of women in the visual arts. But as of the 12th of March, the symposium was scheduled for March 20th. You know, we knew that it was unlikely and quickly found out it was postponed. And at this moment, I can't imagine us trying to reform it, except way into the future. But it gave us this opportunity. Instead of the show coming down after 4 weeks, we have now gone into our 6th and 7th week of the show, and it gave us an opportunity to really focus in on the 12 different women. So in putting the exhibition together, I looked at our roster of female artists and, you know, the kind of work that was being done and who was active and who was ready and who was poised to put a solo show in the future together, and knew that it was an opportunity to dig deeply into each of their careers. And they range from young artists who have never had a solo to artists who are mid-career and have had one or two, and are poised to be working more directly with museums and the museums that are collecting works by women at this time with a focus on that priority. And several artists that I would affectionately call mature, whose careers parallel mine. So it was, you know, there could have been 100 artists in this show, but we can only manage this space, and I kind of thought we might have overdone it, but it looks really nice. Everybody has their own space and they work well together.
Let's go ahead and introduce the other artists that are on the call. I saw that Linda Sikora has logged in and that you are with us. She was coming back from Rochester and is wrapping up her semester. But first, let's go ahead and say hi to Mara Superior, who I want to point out that 2 of the 3 artists that are on the call today are in the Everson's permanent collection. We just added 2 pieces from Mara Superior to the Everson's permanent collection. And one of those pieces is currently on view in an exhibition that I guess is closed to the public. So say hi, Mara.
Hi, good to be here. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And let's see if, is Linda Sikora, are you on? I see that you are logged on. I'll let you turn on your video and your audio if you're able to, but we'll jump to Lauren Mabry, Philadelphia-based artist. So Lauren, say hi and tell us where you're saying hi from.
Hi everybody, thanks so much for coming, and thanks so much for putting this together. I'm coming in today from my studio in Philadelphia.
Right, and I see Linda Sikora, and thank you for making it, and your timing is absolutely perfect.
Thank you. Thanks for hosting this, Garth. It's great. Since you told me about this, I've got to watch a couple of your classes. They've been fantastic. And thanks, Leslie. I'm looking forward to seeing the footage. I'm calling from Alfred Station, where I've been holding court on Zoom with faculty and students for the last couple months.
Amazing. All right, so Leslie, let's go ahead and bring up this video footage. We've got about 15 minutes of footage, but all of the participants, official participants in the call, if you wouldn't mind, if you'd like to chime in, you can unmute your audio, and all of us can kind of have a conversation while we're watching the video, and I'll be able to kind of scrub forward and scrub backward on the video as well. So you won't get to see our faces for a little while, except small at the bottom, but I'm going to share this video.
Leslie, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Linda Sikora. I thought it would be, I wish I could see it. I'm really looking forward to seeing this footage. But I'm just wondering, having curated it, it's one thing to curate and select, and then it's another thing to walk into the space with it set up and before you. And I'm just wondering what maybe in particular struck you once the work was physically in your presence.
Well, it was a complicated show because I wanted it to have vessels like yours, along with pure sculpture. And, you know, so trying to put a show together in ceramics, a group show, is always a challenge when you're working with, you know, something that is really only tied together by the material. But that's kind of the, you know, the Everson, that's kind of our gallery, that's kind of Ensika, where something is so focused on the material, and you really do have to, you know, be respectful of the different traditions that are, you know, figurine, figural, abstraction, you know,
I
decorative
felt,
vessels.
yeah, I mean, it was really what was compelling to me about that were, you know, a couple of things. One of them just being this, you know, it's, you know, they come together by material, and then also you had this, you invited women to show, but just the way it started to speak about time, because of, you know, the history of materials and associations, but also, you know, time that's much larger than a lifetime, which we're experiencing a certain kind of awareness right now with this pandemic. And that broader sense of time, I think, has to do with the way that the artists are working content and making association that either projects forward or pulls from the past up. So that was one really strong impression just from looking at images.
So we're in Ray Dunn's section right now, and Ray, I saw, was
It's Ray Stern.
Stern. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry about that, Ray.
Oh, it's okay. Well, thanks for having us today. It's so great to see everyone. So this is part of a body of work that I created recently. Well, actually, I've been working on it for quite a few years, but it was shown only recently at the Belger Art Center. It's a project with lithophanes. So what you're looking at is actually just porcelain that is touch sensitive. And when you touch the object, it lights up from within, exposing an image of what is, in most cases, images from before the Second World War, people that were affected by the war, and these are images from their lives prior to that change. And the process was created with Aya Margulis. We used to collaborate with her, and she was very helpful in developing the process of creating these lithophane.
So I think the next artist, if we're going in the order of the video, is Kadri Parnamets, and she is based here in Western Massachusetts and Estonia. Her work is a lot about the natural world. So those little bugs you're seeing are kind of universal and are the first things that you hear in the spring, no matter where you are. But it reminds you of Mother Nature, of, you know, motherhood, of rebirth, and she's very ethereal in her thinking. So when she showed them to me, I needed that explanation. She says, like, no matter where you are in the world, when you hear that mosquito, you know where you are. It is a universal sound. And the same for the other insects in it. And her work is produced in porcelain, it's braided surfaces. So if you know Kadri, this work is truly her personality, and it was really a pleasure to see this work evolve and, you know, come from the organic forms that she had been using, and then add the narrative element and have that element be something that was a subject that she was so passionate about. She has a lot of other work about the role of women, so that's a whole different body of work, and you can see all of our artists on our website. So this is Mara, and this one, when we hung the show, we didn't realize how closely tied the material that she was talking about would be to the timing of when the show was on. And so these pieces were obviously made last year and fired and resulted in works that were about the and about the politics of today. But that's, she's always thinking ahead and is very topical. working from a really fabulous tradition of commemorative and using the words, the real mashup of styles. She's here to talk about her work, so I'm sure. I love the way this video sort of gives you the physicality of the work in a way that the still pictures don't.
Yeah, Leslie, you didn't know that you'd be pulled into service as a hand model at the beginning of the pandemic.
I've been called into service during this, virus in ways that I had never imagined in my wildest dreams, including living on Zoom. But thank you for the opportunity to share this show with such a large audience. It's amazing living out in the middle of nowhere, how leveling the playing field is all of a sudden, that we can share things wherever we are in the world.
And Mara, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but I was excited. I didn't know that you actually produce most of your work from your house and have different working spaces kind of within your living room and living spaces. And that sort of continues an amazing tradition from Adelaide Robinhoe as well.
Well, it's just during these past 8 weeks, I do have a beautiful studio in another town. But since there's so much, which I certainly can go to, but I've just been hesitant about venturing out during this time somehow, except occasionally to a farm or rushing into a supermarket. But the things that I've been doing are easy to do from home. I can paint at home. I can work on one piece at a time at home. I'm working on a drawing project, and I can paint on porcelain at home. So there's a lot I can do here.
And Linda, you're separated from your studio for the most part too, right?
My studio's on the property, but it doesn't have internet. But I am working.
That's it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Would you like to talk a little bit about this grouping?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it comes out of a number of different places. It's like a portrait of these pots. So there's stories about the forms and the way they're connected to crockery. They're very elemental. The feet aren't cut. Things like when this one is turned over, you'll see how the bottom is actually glazed. So the bottom is very smooth, which is unlike a crock, but it's sort of made like a crock. So it's playing a lot with this idea of this elemental and this elegance. And I think when you get into the territory of still life, there's always this double presence between, the active and the contemplative, or the purpose and the commentary. And so that bouncing back and forth, curating the pieces, I think first of part of a Stevens poem where he talks about choosing and not excluding, but in fact trying to, it's not a choice between things, but of things. So trying to choose things that are in each other. So this is something I'm thinking about right now. In some ways, these groups were prototype groups because I teach so much I don't really get to produce, but then they bring up these other ideas of what's included and what's excluded, and how each one can speak of the other holistically. So one thing that struck me, I was asking Leslie what struck her about the show as a whole, and one thing that struck me just looking at the images was just the different ways in which the domestic content comes up in this exhibition, not in all pieces, but in a number of them. And I've always been interested in the way the domestic sort of fails to be classified as art. And so it has that relationship to, if we think about a gender show, a show of women's work, it becomes connected to sort of gender failure, or it becomes connected to shadow feminisms. And that was something, shadow feminisms is a sort of a term that Judith Halberstam coined, but it's something that surprised me when I saw the work. And again, I'm looking at it through images, so I'm really itching to be able to walk into the space. But that part of it really, so it's sort of based in you know, negativity and rejection and transformation versus positivity and reform and accommodation. You know, it sort of, you know, works with this idea of failure, which you hear in queer theory, but also in discussing all of the realms of sort of the feminine that sort of push back against the optimism of accomplishment and also the patriarchal models.
So I think one thing that strikes me is that potters can be very voracious when it comes to kind of larger issues of material culture and thinking about kind of the objects that have shaped our culture. And his class is actually birthed out of an object study class, but it's great to see forms like pitchers and basins together, which would have had a much different meaning 100 years ago than they would have today.
Right.
So let's go ahead and keep going. We'll get a chance to come back and have all of you kind of talk to the camera and talk to your work.
So this is the work of Sally Soderbergh, and Sally is probably somebody who's tied to the Everson in a way that nobody else was. My very first trip to the Everson was with Sally when we went to Ensika, and her work was on view in the National. And I believe it was a piece from this series, which she had moved from doing very, you know, sort of American studio pottery, was a founder of the Clay Pot in Brooklyn, supported 2 children through sales of pottery, and then did the Rhinebeck fairs and started to push the work into more vessels with abstraction and glaze, and then jumped into sculpture. I mean, these are solid forms that are solid clay, weigh a lot, and, you know, sort of challenged the material. This was done in the mid-'80s, and so when there was really no gallery system at the time, which was partly the time period for me where I was like, I don't think I'm going to get to do what I want to do in my career with, you know, sort of the craft fair, wholesale, you know, kind of commercial side. And I think that's what Sally ran, you know, head on into, and basically left the clay behind after completing the series and became a painter. So in the conversations we were having about this show, I said to her, I said, can you tie that moment to gender? Do you feel that it was a gender-related response or reaction from the outside world to your work? Was it related to gender? And we both looked at each other and rolled our eyes, and, you know, it would be really hard to sort of use the word blame for why she stopped working based on being a female sculptor at that time. But I think there are a lot of clues that, you know, she experienced, and whether that was or wasn't the reason she gave up clay and then moved on to painting, it certainly contributed to it. And I think the reason that I left as a playmaker definitely had to do with a gender role of not finding a place for my work in a rather male-dominated gallery system, because I really didn't want to make work that was repetitive and, you know, made as basically a multiple art project in large, medium, and small. So my mind didn't work that way. I wanted to make the next piece, not the last piece, and I wanted to create a gallery system for artists, you know, that would allow them to make new work and, you know, push past the, you know, market acceptance. So Sally and I have had many discussions over the years about these, and nothing conclusive. But
the discussion about where these fit in the art world in the 1980s is really interesting, because these look so current and I think fit in so perfectly with the way that artists are exploring materiality, and that exploration of materiality, particularly where it vibrates with this hard-edged geometry, you know, would have no problem, I think, finding an audience for an artist who was kind of starting out today. But I'd love to talk about that a little bit more if we get the chance. And then Linda Srman, I saw, is on the call as well. And Linda, of course, has been, up until recently, a colleague of Linda's at Alfred. And Linda, if you're able to hop on with your microphone, you can. And Linda is represented in the Everson's collection, as is Linda Sikora, if I didn't point that out earlier.
Our videographer adores this work. He said, I could have done just a video about this work. He said there's so many details to explore, and I think with Linda's work, that's part of the, it's part of the point, is that you get very into the details and see where they came from and see your thought process, and then see the effect of what happens, with this material once it's fired.
Oh, and so Tricia, let me make sure that you're able to talk if you're on.
Okie doke, I'm here.
Yay! So terrific to hear you.
Yes, it's nice to be here. This is a wonderful opportunity to talk about our work, and I'm thrilled to be here and part of the Ferrin Contemporary exhibit. It's beautiful.
And you've added some very appropriate bird sounds into the background while you're looking at this work. No, it's gesamt Kunstwerk.
Okay, very good. I have no control of them, and when I was on a video last, people got to see my parrot. So yeah, I love animals. There you go. I do love animals, and so I like to use them as my muse. And what you're seeing here is a tiger trade. Actually, this one is greed, and it's two baboons trading money for a tiger. And I was inspired by the Meissen series, the Monkey Orchestra in Dresden when I went, and I just found it very inspiring. What I saw, there was like hundreds and hundreds of these types of sculptures, and I just thought it'd be interesting to create something that felt both contemporary and something that is from 1740s. This painting is a little hard to see. There's a little bit of a glare, but this is a tiger trade. The other one was greed. So again, they're trading money for the tiger, and the tiger's doing sort of like a photo bomb, and sort of throwing himself in there, and they're exchanging money again for the tiger. The other one, the sculpture was called Diligence, and that one I was trying to create I was thinking about the virtues, and I did the sins and the 7 deadly sins and the 7 virtues. This is one of the 7 virtues, diligence, and it's all porcelain. And I basically had, each time I had a particular virtue, I had to think about, what, like this one was diligence. Diligence to me was, well, it was about obsession and sticking with something until it's done. So I have this guy wearing this funny little hat that he possibly cut out, and a funny little cape. And it just reminded me of like a little kid sitting around cutting out shapes, and just, if anyone's ever seen a 5-year-old with a pair of scissors, they'll just like cut obsessively. And I was kind of hearkening into that with this particular piece. And it was a little challenging to make the hat, not to make the hat, but to pick it up after it was in the greenware state. And I'm sure anyone who's worked with porcelain, I'm sure they'll totally, commiserate with me picking up something that's in this state and then putting it onto something else. It just, your heart palpitates, and it's very stressful. And, this is the fringe that I did around the sides of the pillow. And it was fired separately. So the little baboon man was fired separately from the pillow. But basically that's like, how the sausage is made. But essentially I was inspired by Meissen, and really enjoyed that. And first starting off as an illustrator, I was able to sort of I always loved telling a story. So all of my sculptures are narrative.
We have loaded up a number of pieces by the different artists onto our platform on Artsy. And as this show, extends each week. We're digging deeply into the materials that are available about the different artists' work. So if people are on our mailing list, they will be getting something once a week about one of the artists and making connections. And in the case of Trisha's, several of the pieces from the Virtues and the Sins are on view on Artsy and on our on her artist webpage on our gallery. I mean, this has definitely been with the payroll protection. We basically stopped working at the gallery doing what we normally do and ended up, turning ourselves into online access to the work, online, background. So each week we get to see a different one, and last week was Trisha, and upcoming is Ray Stern. So.
Okay, so let's keep moving forward. Thank you so much, Trisha.
You're welcome. Pleasure.
Anina is, as we got into each person's story, we met Anina through the Assets for Artists program here in North Adams. In our building 13, there's a studio where there are 12 artists can come and work for a period of time. And midsummer, she popped in, having just completed a residency in Rochester and had graduated relatively recently from Rhode Island School of Design, and she had already had a full career in graphic design and decided to become a contemporary artist and go to school for art as and ceramics, and chose RISD. She's been out in Provincetown at the Fine Arts Workshop and spent the winter there, but also teaching at Bennington. So she's hardworking and came to speak on WAMC on the 11th of March, right before we closed. And we got to all kind of spend that last day before shutdown together. And I just feel like her story for what we try to do here in North Adams as in terms of nurturing artists' careers and working within the museum structure and sharing resources. She's a perfect example of how the creative economy works and how the Assets for Artists in Mass MoCA and Ferrin Contemporary, provide these, opportunities, and we really don't know where they go until after they've arrived. And what arrived was Anina and her work in ceramics that harkens back to her cultural heritage and plating, hair plating, and basket weaving. So great things to come with Anina. And sorry she wasn't here today, but I think this video will get used and edited in many ways. Giselle is really a master at this online situation, having figured out how to teach from her kitchen table. So if any of you follow her on Instagram, you'll see what she's been up to. But Giselle came to working with us. It was basically Anderson Ranch, Kohler. She came to work for us at SOFA and then moved here to Western Mass to open our gallery in Pittsfield with us and take advantage of a studio that hadn't been built yet. So she was in her late 20s when we first met, and I just feel like her career and our changes with each decade have been real sort of copacetic and side by side. So I was so pleased when she was able to send us this grouping of vessels from her studio in Montana. She went from Western Mass on to Philadelphia, and then at the Play Studio, and then Archie Bray, then back to Anderson Ranch, and has now established her studio full-time. So Christina is scheduled for a exhibition with us this fall, and it'll be our second solo with her. But I think we're all kind of questioning, is life going to go on the way it always has? I mean, is it going to be practical to move large works from North Carolina, where her studio is, to Massachusetts if nobody can get in and out? Certainly hoping that by the fall we'll go back to having real-time, exposure to artworks, because I think we're all going to get at the moment, I think we're all excited about being able to see so much without leaving home, but you know, there's something about physical sculpture and play that you really want to see it, you know, and touch it.
And I will put in a plug for the Everson. We have a major piece of Christina's in our collection, which has been on view frequently in the year and change since we've brought it into the collection, and is incredibly popular. And it was one of the first things that I did as curator, was to bring in one of her pieces.
Well, that was really a great choice of yours, Garth. We were really happy about that. It was, and every time I've been to the Everson, it's been on view, so.
You can see Christina in one of the most recent episodes of Craft in America.
The episode about identity.
Okay, Lauren, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to talk a little bit about this. And as a little bit of background, I've followed Lauren's career since she was in graduate school, which she was at graduate school at University of Nebraska, where I got my undergrad degree, go Huskers. But she had a lot of success right out of the gate with showing in museums, getting in collections. A lot of you will know her from her cylinder-based work, but Lauren, in the last year, and some of this work was first shown with Leslie, is really on to something new and exciting.
Thanks, Garth. Yeah, we're starting with one of these glazed flow blocks pieces. And the seed for this idea, I think, was planted in 2014 when I was at Antica. I was at the exhibition that was at Kohler, and had a bunch of pieces on view from the collection. And there was one by Karen Massaro called Glazed Flow Blocks, and they were actually blocks that were kind of used, like they look kind of like small pyramids, and they were used to measure the flow of glaze in the industrial setting. And it really, her work resonated with me in that moment so much because I feel so connected to process as idea, and materiality and kind of interaction and transformations that happen when working with ceramic materials and kind of their inherent nature to melt and move and turn different colors during the firing. So when I saw that work by her, it really stuck out to me because I hadn't seen anything like it before, and it was just so minimal. It was just this simple look at the glaze flowing down this kind of like dry surface, because the blocks that had the glaze on them weren't necessarily beautiful themselves. It was kind of about watching this luscious glaze flowing down them. And she was the first artist who worked at Kohler who used kind of some of the arbitrary objects around the factory to make artwork. And that really resonated with me as well, because so much of my work
put on speaker.
Intuitive and kind of happens in the moment.
Hey Siri, put on speaker.
Make it somebody else talking there too. Yeah, that's kind of, the new glaze flow pieces that I'm doing have their origins there, but they're connected to the cylinder work in a way that extends my interest in color, movement, and the transformation of glaze in general is sort of what I've always been most inspired by and obsessed with. And so I'm taking my paintings that I've done on cylinders, which I think if we go back to the cylinder piece maybe, and I can talk about that a little bit. That when I came to ceramics, I originally worked in functional and utilitarian objects. I was very young though, and that was my introduction. But as I moved along, I really found my voice as a painter with color and with glaze, that in a way that glaze captures me, and I make all of my glazes myself, and I love having that control over the subtle variations in surface, transparency, opacity, the matte, the gloss, the glitter, and all the other amazing things that glaze can do that paint can't do. And so, you know, the cylinder is this signature shape that I will always keep working on. It's like my bar napkin or my blank canvas or my sketchbook, where all the ideas kind of generate. And the idea with these is, of course, that they're like a round painting, this kind of endless 360-degree canvas that wraps around the object is what is so interesting to me. So those things are from the glaze flow blocks have kind of come in, but it's still like the ongoing interest in the material itself and everything that it's capable of that maybe, you know, go beyond our preconceived ideas.
Great. Well, we should be able to kind of go back and revisit that and talk a little bit more about your work. Crystal Mori, you are actually on the call. If you're able to unmute yourself and narrate, we'll invite you to do so.
Crystal's work was brought to my attention through, I believe, Chris Onteman, and also through some other, you know, Crystal's very good with social media. I just kept seeing it, and I then put the connection together with something that had to do with Chris Onteman, and Crystal can fill me in on that at some point for our history. But I saw the potential in this work as it really fit with our program because it had the connections to history and the history of figurine, and particularly Baroque figurine. And we were working on some proposals for exhibitions in period houses where, or, you know, historic collections. And we were lucky enough to be able to put an exhibition together at the Frick Museum in Pittsburgh. And Crystal took the opportunity to dig deeply into the collection at the Frick and work with Don Green, the curator, to create a body of work. And I said, well, next step is a solo and a focused group, which appeared at our gallery last fall, called Venus on the Waves. And so the exhibition was here with about a dozen pieces, of which several of them were acquired by institutions, and those institutions definitely have collections of figurine, you know, porcelain figurines, narrative figurines. But this comes out of California.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the video so that we can all hop on and keep chatting. So any unfinished thoughts that or connections that anybody made as we were kind of talking over the images that Leslie had put together?
Well, one of the things I want to tell everyone is that the video was finished last night. It doesn't have a soundtrack, and we are going to post it on our website so that you can watch it at your own leisure and not have to struggle through a browser delays. So it's very crisp, and I don't know whether it's my computer or the system that we're working with, but I was so pleased to see it, and I really want to thank Joe for jumping in at the last minute and providing it. And each of the artists are going to get a clip of their work, and you know, we're like really open to the idea of how to use the video to talk about work at a time where you can't see and touch it in person.
Lauren, I was so glad to hear that you brought up Karen Massaro, who's a great hero of mine, and I think a very underrated artist that her work sort of went in and out of, you know, what was in fashion in the galleries, but I think she was always true to kind of her own sense of process and experimentation and geometry, and sometimes her work looks so slick and technical that people aren't able to actually see the interesting sort of experimental material edge that it has.
Yeah, that was, you know, my first introduction to her work was, you know, I was things that looked geometric, vessels, and even jewelry. I mean, I might be maybe imagining some of that, but I remember a very specific, like, matte surface, pottery, functional, utilitarian metric pastel colors. And I always loved her work. I would recognize it. And when I saw that piece, I didn't recognize it. And I went over, but I immediately recognized her name and, read a little bit about it. And, I kind of tucked it in my back pocket. So I was like, wow, like those are the moments that I see when I'm working in glaze that I'm like, wow, like this needs to be looked at. And I love that she could, kind of work in those different modes. Something I'm working with too.
Leslie, you were able to actually convene all of the artists about a week ago, and you wrangled like 11 people on a Zoom call. What were some of the most meaty themes that bubbled up as you all talked together as a group of artists?
Well, I'd have to review my notes of this, and we did record it. I think the overwhelming feeling is that this is a really pregnant moment in life, and it's right before something. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how painful it's going to be. We don't know whether what comes of it is going to fulfill our expectations or completely change, because we don't know whether there's going to be art fairs in the future. We don't know what is going to happen to people who depend on sales for a living. But I think overwhelming, it was like, what's going to happen? Where are we going? And what are we experiencing now? And so Ray, who lives in New York City, had that poignant moment of saying, I've been listening to ambulances, for months, weeks, and they aren't as many as there used to be. Or the women who are teaching from home and having to double as, homeschool teachers, and those of us with older parents, it's like the immediacy of trying to do what we've always done during this time of COVID, and then imagining what it's going to be like in the future. And I'm really interested in seeing this group of women continue this conversation. We talked about our attention spans and that how hard it is to, we've been going now for an hour and 15 minutes, and we'll go, as you said, but it's really hard to watch anything for, 5 minutes and not wait to see what else is happening? What else should I be paying attention to? So with any luck and any funding, we want to continue the conversation and create an archive, and whether it's a page through catalog to start with video links to it, but we're all learning so much from one another and all these new tools. So I think that was the takeaway, is that there's a lot more to be said, and we've just scratched the surface, and the opportunity that is coming from being in lockdown is creating new directions for us all to go in.
Mara, I wanted to ask you a question. You're someone who, out of the artists that we're talking to today, deals with history most explicitly, and a lot of your work contains references to past historical cycles and sort of the material culture of the past. Are there ways in which looking at the pandemic as a lens into the past is working its way into your work and what you're thinking about at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I'm looking at medieval art, and I'm specifically looking at Hieronymus Bosch, and thinking about the time of the plague. And it was a time without a lot of communication, and a huge time for human imagination. And I have a marvelous library, and I was just looking at this. His imagination is so far outweighs anything we could come up with or I've ever seen before, and it was done hundreds of years ago. So I'm just thinking about other catastrophes and the time of that plague, and just exactly how it's going to come into my work.
I will throw out the Me Too movement, I think, as a point of discussion, and I think it caused lots of us to take a step back and take a look at our relationships with others and power dynamics. Would anyone like to address ways in which the conversation around gender and power may have changed in the last year or so?
It certainly was one of the things that, hold that up, Mara, that's great.
Oh, there we go.
And actually, that's the image that Kadri Parnamits has in one of her pieces also. So it definitely played into the idea of wanting to do the symposium and the series of projects that we were doing in Building 13 that involved publishing, and the symposium of speakers that included curators and artists. And we just sort of wanted to take the power that was coming out of the Me Too movement and make sure that the women that we have worked with, you know, have an opportunity to be shown, have their names and, you know, featured, have their biographies, their images identified with their names, because you don't really want to say, you know, why have there been no great female artists, and leave that as, you know, that you didn't do your job under, you know, not under my watch. So I kept powering through it because it really was difficult to, you know, sort of put 12 women, all of whom are at different stages of their career and different comfort zones with putting themselves out in front. And I feel like a lot of what happens with the Me Too movement was you start to review all the steps you took, and were you complicit? You know, were you, you know, did something happen in your life that shouldn't have happened and that you wouldn't let happen again? So that's kind of dangerous zone to go into when you're looking backwards, but I did want to go forward saying I did my job.
And Linda Sikora, if you're able to hop back on with your video, as an academic, this is a question that I could lodge toward you. It's amazing as I visit schools and, you know, as someone who has been an educator myself, you know, overwhelmingly women are dominating not just ceramics, but higher education in terms of the number of students and the number of students who are taking classes. Yet I think when we look at the number of male grad students, there's still an imbalance between the number of women who are active in the field and men. And, you know, you're at Alfred, which is sort of on the top of the mountain in terms of access to great grad students. Can you reflect a little bit about what you've seen over the last 20 years as someone who's, you know, teaching students and looking at grad students in the field?
Sure. I don't know if my video's on.
It is.
I mean, it looks like it is to me. Okay. Yeah, you know, I think it's, I mean, this is a bugaboo of just academia itself, which is a very privileged space and has been. And I think, you know, over the last decade, there's been very concerted efforts to begin to really change that to the best of the institution's, you know, sort of ability and different implementing different programs and different types of recruitment. So, you know, one thing that's shifted perhaps, I mean, art is still very, at least in the Northeast, where we are, it's very, you know, it remains very white. I think there's a real mix of gender and identity. I mean, that's pretty healthy. It's, but one thing that is happening is a lot more international recruitment. I think that type of recruitment is going to be, which is related in some way to the story of immigration in the country. So as we sort of become fundamentally a broader thinking culture, that's going to impact that layer as well. You know, beyond that, it's sort of trying to, you know, the place of the arts in general and social and economic structures, of course, impacts the thinking of those people funding education, which are parents primarily, are often. So as right now, sort of, you know, the way art is practiced, or the way creative culture can integrate beyond just these paradigms of you know, structures that we're more familiar with, I think that will continue to improve. So but you cannot, you know, blink in this process. You have to be very, very awake and very diligent. And it's a continual investment, and it's an investment that's long overdue because it wasn't tended to for so long. And so there was such a progression into a realm that had closed itself off. So it's at the top of every single list. It's very hard work. It's long-standing work. And it's I think, becomes integrated into a way of being. It's sort of what Leslie said. You know, we all sort of look, you know, when that movement hit, we sort of looked at ourselves and our neighbors and our behavior, and you know, it's a real culture shift. And this COVID-19 thing is interesting in the way that it begins to exercise that muscle. You know, just thinking about going back into the classroom, it's not simply business as usual. It's really going back there, thinking about a completely new culture. And I think in North America, we're not particularly agile in that way as North American nationals. So there's, you know, that's kind of very generalized answer. You know, some of the more specific answers to that question might become a bit too anecdotal for our business today.
Although, speaking of anecdotal, Roberta Griffith is on the call. Hi, Roberta, and she asked a question about the specific ratio of men to women in programs, but I think maybe Alfred specifically. I know that up until recently, there's been a pretty strict 50-50 gender balance among the faculty, and I wouldn't be able to speak to the gender balance within ceramics, the students, but maybe you can.
I think it's at the grad level, it's fairly balanced. There's only 8 students, at least in ceramics, there's 8 students coming in every year. So that balancing, there's a lot of balancing going on in that class. Genres is one. We're trying to represent a range of genres, a range of genders, a range of backgrounds, a range of ethnicity. You know, we're trying to do that. So we have the pool that applies to do that with, and the pool we try to recruit. At the undergraduate level, I would say it weighs heavily female, more heavily female.
Great. I wanted to point out that you know, we've talked a little bit about some of our heroes and some of the figures who were permission givers and you know, pushed people onto the stage. You know, my first real mentor, my biggest mentor in the ceramics world is Gail Kendall, a longtime professor at University of Nebraska. Would any of you like to particularly give a shout out to you know, strong mentor figures who helped along the way that don't necessarily get their due?
Well, I have somebody who I felt was very influential for me. If you can hear me, Tricia?
Yeah, I can hear you, Tricia.
Okay, great. I took a workshop up at in Tuscany several years ago with Beth Kavanagh-Steckler. And for those who don't know her, she did life-size sculptures of animals that basically taught me my process. And without knowing how to sculpt, I mean, we sculpted large works, but I took that same methodology and used it to make my body of work. I've done other works before, but not with any real knowledge. I've learned as I went. So I have not gone to Alfred. I'm one of those people who have learned as I went, and have been successful in that by being diligent and by taking workshops that were with extraordinary people. And I think Beth Kavanagh-Steckler is one of those people who were above and beyond extraordinary.
Agree. Thank you.
I have one that I want to add to that, which is how many female dealers there were. And as we were entering the field, there, you know, Esther Sachs, Dorothy Weiss, you know, Rena Branston, Ruth Bronstein, You know,
Joanne Rapp.
Joanne Rapp. I
Helen
remember
Drutt.
saying to Joanne, I want to be you. You know, that these are the women that founded this field and were incredibly important as nurturers for, you know, artists of all genders, and in a field that was really, you know, not a proven one. I mean, they went where no one had gone before, and where they, you know, it may have shifted to be more male-dominated, you know, in the 90s, or when money, you know, sort of stepped in. But they're the ones who paved the road, and they're the ones who, you know, gave me an idea that this was a career that I could pursue.
I think I would give shout out to a scholar, Jenny Sorkin. You know, he already took my other one, Garth, Gail Kendall, but there's too many, there's so many to name, but I think our Korean scholar, writer, Jenny Sorkin, and the things that she's contributing to, you know, looking at the history of American ceramics through a feminist lens has been incredible, and kind of bringing these women to our attention now, to see how they really shaped the history of American ceramics, and the men who actually became known that were popular. So Penny Sorkin's book, Live Form, is something that's inspired me in the past, you know, recent year or two, and shapes the way I'm thinking right now.
Absolutely. Well, sadly, it has reached 2:30, and I think I may bring the session to a formal close, and we can have a little bit of a chat session after I turn the recording off. But we weren't able to get crazy deep, which it seems the more people that we have these conversations sort of go along those lines. But I want to thank all of you for joining me, and would invite everybody to keep joining us at 1 o'clock on Friday afternoons for the Everson study sessions, which will continue into the foreseeable future right now.
Thank you, Garth, for the opportunity.
Go see the Nature Nurture exhibition online. You'll be able to find that video content used in a lot of different ways. Any final things that anyone else would like to, any of our panelists would like to plug that are coming up or that you're working on post-coronavirus shutdown?
I think we're all looking forward to finding out when we can open the show to the public. And what we're hoping to do is have a final gathering, potentially some more conversations like this, and create documentation about this time. But stand by, sign up for our newsletter, and you'll know when we are able to do potentially a 10-person closing reception with 100 people online. So thanks for this opportunity.
Indeed. So Linda, Mara, Lauren, any other things to add?
Just, yeah, looking forward to whatever's to come. I have a show in 2021 in April, so hopefully that won't get postponed, but that'll be in Denver at the Prince Gallery. So I guess I can put all my energy into working on that right now, since there's nothing else happening.
Looking forward to constructing porcelain again in my studio as soon as I can get there, which hope is soon.
Just thanks everyone, and thanks Garth for this programming. It's fantastic. And thanks Leslie and all. Yes.
Indeed. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and I'm going to go ahead and hit the turn the record button off. But join us again in the coming weeks, and we will hang out online for a little bit.